Hello and welcome to the Innings Break Podcast. Today we're on our third episode, and today the title will be The Fall from Grace. So far we've had so much fun with our podcast and a lot of feedback has come in and we've updated our audio and stuff, so hopefully that's improving. As always, if you want to get involved, please do let us know, and of course leave your thoughts about this episode down in the comments. That's what it's all about. So this week, our title of the episode is going to be The Fall from Grace, and we have a new member. So, Mr. Footil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really keen to get involved with the Innings Break Podcast. So I'm Footil R34 on Reddit. I've been an active member of the sub for about 4 or 5 years or so, and yeah, just as far as an initiative to make this sort of like Reddit-based podcast, it's just really something that I think is fantastic. It's going to take the subreddit to a new level, and hopefully the more participation we get on it, the better it'll be. I'm from Australia and I support Sri Lanka primarily. You'll also often see me in like West Indies threads or Pakistan threads. So basically I'm a fan of cricket, but I'm a fan of Sri Lanka first and foremost. My favourite cricket memory, I think it would have to be when we whitewashed Australia 3-0. That was in 2016, and what was special about that series was particularly the first test of that series, where we were bowled out for about 110 before lunch on day one, and we ended up winning that match emphatically thanks to, a sensational second innings 100 by Kusal Mendes, and it was just a fantastic series. It just picked up from there. My favourite cricket player, that would probably have to be MJ, Mahela Jayawardene. He's just one of the most aesthetic batsmen, I think, in the history of the sport, and it was always such a pleasure to watch him in action. And as for who I think is the most overrated player of all time, I'm kind of drawing a blank on that, honestly. Probably someone like W.G. Grace or someone from like the 19th century like that. Because I think modern cricketers in the last few decades, I think they're fairly rated in most cases.
Oh, we have a controversy. WG Grace, overrated.
One way to deflect, man. That's one way to deflect. Like, nobody will argue on that. Nobody is hard-hand fan of WG Grace to stand up for him.
What do you mean? I run the WG Grace fan club and I'm very offended.
How many members are in your...
Well, I was hoping to get you guys to sign up, but I don't know if Mr. Foothill wants to join anymore, but okay.
To defend my claim that he's the most overrated player of all time, I think to be considered overrated, first of all, you have to be rated as like an all-time great, I remember in the first episode, you guys were saying stuff like Afridi was overrated or Andrew Flintoff was overrated. And in my opinion, they weren't good enough to be rated. Like, they weren't all-time greats, I mean, W.G. Grace is considered one of the all-time greats.
True. A fair opinion, I'm sure. So your favourite player is Mahela Jayawardene. My memories of Mahela, this may be quite skewed, obviously, because I don't follow Sri Lankan cricket as closely as you do, is that the thing that impressed me most is that he kept on improving until the very end of his career. And like towards the end, like 2011, 2012 is when he was like the finished article.
I think he sort of plateaued around 2007, 2008, and then he had a short decline just in the last year or so before he retired, because his test average was like in the low 50s at one point, and by the time he retired, it went down to about 49. So just at the end, he tailed off a little bit. But as for improving as he aged, that was Sangakkara, I think, more so than Mahela. Mahela sort of came into the team in like the late 90s, and he was like this prodigy, like sort of like the Sri Lankan Ricky Ponting or the Sri Lankan Sachin Tendulkar. There was so much hype about him from his exploits in high school cricket that people just expected amazing things from him right away. And sometimes I feel like cricketers who come up like that, they're a little bit different to your, Sangakkara or your Misbah-ul Haq type, who they sort of come in with a little bit less hype, and they're more motivated in a way, I think, to keep improving as they progress in their career. Whereas the hot prospect, I just think that sometimes because of the early hype, it's like they get to a certain level and then they sort of coast for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point mentioned. So with expectations comes pressure, and not everyone is able to handle the pressure. For example, in case of India, we have great expectations from Virat Kohli. If he doesn't score 50 or 100 every match, we find it that the performance wasn't great. It wasn't even good. But on the other hand, if somebody else scores even a 40, that is considered to be a good, decent enough performance. So yeah, the expectations are high. Sometimes that can be a bit detrimental.
Yeah. 100% agree. Well, we'll definitely visit the Sri Lankan team again in this episode. So let's move on to our first segment of this week, and that is the shitpost of the week. And this one's pretty interesting. Do you want to introduce it, Mr. Wicketkeeper?
Sure. So this week we didn't had a good shitpost that we can focus on, but we found a thread, which is basically unpopular opinion shitpost thread. And in this, there were a lot of folks who commented, and there was somebody called Mr. Rav Ars who's talking about Kohli's wrong man to lead ODI. Is that right, Mr. Rav?
I 100% agree, but I've been informed by someone that is not an unpopular opinion, and that is a lot of people seem to be agreeing with me on that. But yeah, if that's not my hot take, I'll tell you something that is. I think Shubman Gill is the next GOAT, and he is wasting away on India's bench. And for whatever political reasons, they are not playing him. So that's another hot take from me.
But yeah, I think in this we went through a lot of shitposts. I didn't feel as worthy as what we had last time as Mankading, but there are a few things. Pat Cummins is not suitable for captaincy role. It was just, come on, I'm going to bait you. Somebody come and fight me. And I see it's okay. I see somebody, Oklahoma imperialist, talking about Moeen Ali is better than Don Bradman, which was like, what? That doesn't stand anywhere, but whatever it takes.
Another one which I found pretty interesting is that there isn't a single opener in current test matches who could be considered world class. And you know what? The more I think about it, the more I agree with this guy. I believe his name is OK. That's the poster's name, but that's a pretty good hot take right now.
No, I wouldn't say it's a hot take. It's fair. It's not something sensationalist like Moeen Ali is better than Don Bradman. I think that's a fair opinion. There aren't really too many great opening batsmen going around right now.
Well, I still consider Warner as one of the very good opening batsmen. I mean, not as a pair, yes, probably we don't have a good pair opening batsman. Warner is pretty good.
I wish our friend Angry Lettuce was here to tell us how badly Warner does when he goes to England. But, I mean, yeah, he is pretty good. Warner is pretty good. Inconsistent since since his ban.
One more post that I found interesting. It was a shit post, so to say, but it is the highest rated comment, and it says that why can't Australia reverse swing anymore? So it's definitely insinuating that they use sandpaper or some ball tampering tactics to reverse swing. But this is driving from the discussion that everyone had last week was, do all teams ball tamper? And considering the recent news that because players cannot use saliva anymore post-coronavirus, in the post-coronavirus era, will they allow ball tampering to some extent?
So I don't think it's going to be still called tampering. It's going to be dedicated side where you're going to polish. I think the tampering by definition is that you're not using any foreign object to change the shape of the ball. But if under umpire supervision, you're going to polish the ball using an external polish, I don't think it will still be a ball tampering. It's just a way of trying to spice up the news.
Right, okay. So it's legal ball changing the condition, basically.
The laws are still not defined yet. So maybe umpires will say, no, if you have to use this polish, you have to use it both sides.
I think that the laws currently are no foreign object can be taken on the field to change the condition of the ball. If there is a place thing, I suppose, what the umpires can give each team, I suppose it wouldn't be a foreign object because it'll be part of the setup.
It's going to be fun. I mean, post-coronavirus, the whole cricket is going to be different because obviously probably you won't have that much fanfare and always the condition of play, how are you going to do high-fives and everything. It's going to be very weird post-coronavirus.
I just want cricket to be back, to be honest. I miss it a lot, and football, but it will come back. Hopefully. One more shitpost, which I saw very often, was that Isha Guha is a very overrated commentator. I saw this like 4 or 5 times by 4 or 5 different people. And I don't know, she's an okay commentator. She's not a GOAT commentator, so I suppose it's kind of correct.
She's way better than many.
Okay, she's better than Sanjay Manjrekar. That's something. Sanju Manju, but
she's an even better commentator than Sunny Gavaskar or Ramesh Raja or people who just discuss what is going on. She is able to elaborate a bit, but yeah, I would say she isn't at the level of, let's say, Harsha Bhogle, but she's pretty good.
My favorite commentator who got sacked was David Gower, man. I miss him. I don't know how Sky let him go. He was my all-time favorite, completely unbiased, unlike the rest of the English commentary. But that's a topic for another time. But yeah, I really miss him. But yeah, I agree. Isha Guha is an overrated in the fact she's not a GOAT, but she's a good commentator.
I always enjoyed Gower's like vocabulary. He'd say stuff like, "The weight of evidence is supportive of a theory," and all these really like intellectual sounding sort of comments on cricket, which always made him stand out to me.
How do you like Danny Morrison?
I think he has his place in the IPL, but nowhere else. IPL is fine. He's made for the IPL, right?
Yeah.
He's just made to say TLF Super Sixes.
I don't know. I like it. I mean, it's fun to see the animation and his voice, and like, it's cool that it's not just plain or like the ball has went to the mid on like Imran Khan style boring commentary. I used to like Tony Greig as well. Like he also had that flavor of like, oh, it's high up in the air, and then like he had that excitement when you watch the game, especially with advent of ODIs early in the day.
So, the next part of this week's podcast, well, it was meant to be a noteworthy stats post, but unfortunately this week, we couldn't really find any. I'm sure there are some, but we probably just overlooked them by accident. So instead, this week, we're going to be looking at the history post of the fortnight, and I'm going to hand over to our esteemed colleague, Arg, to talk us through this one.
Okay, guys. So, yeah, we did not have any stats posts, so let's discuss history for a moment. Sorry, people who did not like history in school. So, this post dates back to 1992. Not the post, but the content in the post, so to say. The post was made by one user, Ray Dawn, and it's a clipping of a newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald, which was published on Tuesday, February 4th, 1992. And the headline is, "In Perth, a Star is Born." It's a reference to the Sachin Tendulkar's third century in Perth, the third century of his career, in which he scored 114 runs.
Did anyone here watch that live?
I was born 4 years later.
I feel I'm the oldest guy in this club, in this podcast, but yeah, I think I was still very young at that time. But this was in Australia, and it was hard in early 90s. Watch Australia games, so like the broadcasting issues and time difference was difficult, so I did not watch it. But yeah, this was something that I remember. Sachin Tendulkar to the fame was discussed so much, and I want to point out one thing: that article, the language used in the article is phenomenal. Peter Roebuck, he has narrated a story of an innings of a persona of Sachin Tendulkar. It's beautiful. Like, you don't see that pretty much. So I really like this article. I wish I could take a copy of it and keep it.
Yeah, sure. Young Sachin on the shores of Australia for the first time. It was, I bet it was pretty special. And, I think I saw the highlights of that on Twitter. I think people were playing it back because of obviously the anniversary, and it was a pretty spectacular innings. He just looks like in his element, like he's loving life, and nothing fazed him. Yeah, I just miss watching Sachin. Yeah. It's going to turn into one of those Sachin, we wish Sachin was still playing podcasts too.
The sub is not gonna like it because they are Druid fans, and many people on the sub do denounce Sachin for some reason or the other, maybe say he's overrated or something. But something that this innings set up was that he kind of always came in to rescue India. He was always there for a long, long time to rescue India from terrible situations. The team was not very good. The support he received from other end for a long, long time was not great. But yeah, he still did his job, saved a lot of test matches, and converted a lot of possible defeats into victories in ODIs as well.
Yeah, one of my favorite Sachin innings comes from that sort of 90s time period. I wasn't around to see it live either. It was the 169 he made in, I think it was Cape Town. It was definitely in South Africa. And he put on I think nearly 300 runs with Azharuddin at 5 runs and over or something in a test match. And they were 5 for 50 or something when those two came together to bat. And that's just an incredible innings. So if you haven't seen it, look it up on YouTube.
Now we have time. I mean, we have nothing better to do, so let's all do that during Corona lockdown.
You guys are making me feel old. Has anybody seen Sharjah inning?
No.
I was 2 years old, so no.
Come on, guys.
Sharjah was probably one of my
yeah, that was one of the
cricket
best
memories.
That's one of the best innings I've ever seen. Apart from his 200 was also phenomenal, but Sharjah was something phenomenal. I don't know, he was in a mood. He was just hitting the shots that day. He was determined. I want to push it.
I saw the highlights of that innings a couple of days back, and yeah, I do agree with wicketkeeper's comments that it was something special. It felt as if he is determined to push through. And the only requirement for that innings was that they score a certain number of runs to qualify for the finals. But he was still pushing for the victory. That is something that I really liked, even though the victory seemed improbable.
So now it's time to move on to the main topic of this week's podcast. And as we mentioned earlier, the title is The Fall from Grace. And in particular, we're going to be talking about the Sri Lankan cricket team. Now, of course, they're not the only team to have fallen from grace in the past. Of course, you could argue that Aussies fell pretty hard after they lost all their stars. And, of course, West Indies aren't the force that they used to be. And hopefully in another episode sometime we can discuss this with some fans from their respective nations. So if you're interested, please do get in contact with us because that will be something awesome. This week's focus is on the Sri Lankan team's fall from grace. And luckily, because we have Foothill with us, I think we're going to be able to discuss this topic in quite some depth. Foothill, let's hand over to you. So where do you want to start with the ex-greats of the Sri Lankan team? What do you think was the era where they were all playing at once?
Well, I would say this sort of period of success, if you want to contrast it with what's happened the last few years, the period of success would probably be 2007 to 2014. So during that time, there was consecutive ODI World Cup finals, 3, I think, T20 World Cup finals, with one of them being victorious. And there was a period there in Sri Lankan cricket where the white ball team especially was really consistent and really quite strong. In terms of test matches, I would also say that that's the period that we're looking at where we probably saw the best Sri Lankan red ball team to date. And, we've lost a lot of those, a lot of players from that generation. So Dilshan has retired, Sangakkara Jayawardene, obviously, Kulasekara, Rangana Herath, Ajanta Mendes. And in terms of test match specialists, we also lost Tilan Samarira and Prasanna Jayawardene. So, the nucleus of that fantastic team that we had from 2007 to 2014 has retired since then. And, when we speak about falls from grace or teams declining, a lot of the time people sort of look at retirements, I feel, as something that's sort of crucial. But, the question I want to ask you guys, and this is general, not just about Sri Lanka, do you really think that retirements are that influential?
I do think retirements are influential. especially even if you consider India, when the greats retired, Sachin fell from his peak, Dravid retired, Ganguly wasn't there anymore, Lakshman retired. There was kind of a vacuum left behind, and it took a bit of time to fill in. One more thing that I believe that increases the problem is if we do not have a solid domestic circuit in the country. So if we have domestic circuit which is well built, well constructed, in that scenario, I think getting there, finding replacements is easier. And I have read about it in case of Sri Lanka that the domestic circuit is weak, and this is causing problems for them to replace players quickly.
Right. Okay. So I definitely see that point of view, but I think retirement hurts if you lose all of your legends in one go. Right. If you lose the nucleus of the team straight away, like the Aussies did, that really hurt them. I think with India it was a bit more gradual. I think also with Sri Lanka, they lost them gradually. I mean, I could be mistaken. I think first was Murli or Jayasuriya, and then after some time, Jayawardene went, and then Sangakkara. But I think they stuck around with the next generation of players, if you get what I mean. I think they were there to transfer the culture. Whereas with Australia, I think because they all went in one go.
Well, I think it's how your bench strength is. How strong is your bench, and that defines you're gonna continuing. If it's gonna be gradual. If your legends are retiring and you have people to take that spot, like there are people competing to take those spots, that's where you think that, okay, this will continue. I think in case of India, when everybody retired, Dhoni, Kohli, Sehwag, these guys were taking the mantle forward for a while. Gambhir was there. They were like all doing, Yuvraj was doing phenomenal in his peak. And then when these guys retire, there were few overlaps, like who were always there, who were ready to perform. But I think Australia has been doing that for a long time, like in the times from Greggs, when Steve Waugh was instated as a captain, and then whole team was built around his captaincy, and then it went to Ponting.
Right, they were
now this methodical structure that they want to make sure that their bench strength is ready.
Right, so Australia were grooming Michael Clarke when Ponting was there, and they were grooming Ponting when Waugh was there, right? So they had that kind of vision for the future. I can't comment on Sri Lanka because I didn't follow that too closely. But I definitely think the legends retiring has a big impact because, like, how rare was it that to get the world's highest wicket taker in Test matches alongside a Sangakkara who averages more than 55 in Test match cricket, alongside Jayawardene who also averages 50 plus. It's very rare, right? Like, I don't think that will happen again for a long time. It may not happen again. I mean, I could be mistaken.
So Foothill, if may I ask you this question that I don't know if you know about this, that how is the local structure, like the first class structure, is working right now, that's preventing good players to come up? Is there any motivation to play cricket among youngsters right now?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, it's just like anywhere else in South Asia. The passion for cricket is there. People want to play cricket all the time. I don't think it's a problem of the sport is losing its relevance to the public. I think cricket is still very important to everyone in South Asia, not just Sri Lanka. And, teams go through periods of poor performance, but it's not because of the lack of enthusiasm among the players. So about the domestic structure and the first class system specifically, this is quite a long-term problem with Sri Lanka cricket. It goes back, to my knowledge, at least to the 90s. So at the start of the podcast, we were talking about Mahela Jayawardene and how he was like a teenage prodigy. That's because of the sort of flaws of the first class system, that if someone shows a lot of promise in high school cricket, they get fast-tracked to the international side after just a handful of first-class games or domestic 50-over games. We saw this happen recently at the World Cup with Avishka Fernando. He sort of came out of nowhere for a lot of cricket fans around the world. But in Sri Lanka, he was just known as a really promising talent from from high school cricket, and he just got thrown straight into the international side. And going back a few years, that was also the case of Kusal Mendes. So the reason this happens is because there's a feeling, and it's right, the feeling is that the first-class system doesn't adequately prepare young players for Test cricket. Back when we had an Australian coach about 10 years ago or so, and he said, I forget his name, but he said something like, I'm training players how to play first-class cricket when they're in the Test match side.
Sri Lankan cricket is not as rich as obviously the big three, but do you think there's also like a lot of corruption and stuff which is kind of hampering the growth of the domestic circuit and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, of course. Corruption, nepotism, and match fixing. Even they've all been serious problems in Sri Lanka cricket for a long time, as was exposed by the Al Jazeera documentary from a couple of years ago. And there was a number of changes made to the structure of Sri Lanka cricket, as in the cricket board, sort of in the aftermath of that scandal. So the former president of SLC was sacked by the sports minister because his family had some sort of connection to the gambling industry. And this guy kept the job for 10, 12 years. It wasn't until the scandal broke through the Al Jazeera documentary that there was enough, pressure on the government to step in and do something about it. On top of that, there's the more usual sort of cricket board corruption. So, executives taking money from the team and, taking it in their own pockets. And that type of, organizational corruption, which is not unique to Sri Lanka. I think it also happens a lot in Zimbabwe and possibly West Indies as well. But yeah, sports corruption is a serious problem, and that's not something that can be resolved very easily. It takes a lot of commitment from the government to sort that out.
Sure, it's a cultural thing that obviously takes a long time with any sort of cultural change. So we've discussed the retirement and stuff, and obviously the political side of it. What else do you think kind of contributed to kind of the decline of the Sri Lankan team over the years? Do you think that it's simply a case of there isn't enough talent to replace the legends which have gone, or do you think the talent's there and for whatever reason it's not being displayed in its proper form?
One point that comes to my mind immediately is what I've seen is the fitness levels of Sri Lankan players have dropped significantly over the past few years. I've seen players getting fatter, which is surprising considering they're playing quite a lot. There has been that biscuit controversy as well, where players are not allowed to have biscuits in dressing rooms. So what is this all about? Is Sri Lankan cricket not managing the players' fitness properly, or what?
Well, I think that's partially true, that the management and the coaching, the fitness coaching, the diet management, that could be made more professional. But on the other hand, it's 50-50. Some of the responsibility has to go to the players. I mean, you guys are international athletes. It's disgraceful to see, Angela Matthews or Lasif Malinga show up to a match and, they look like they're pregnant with that giant gut. And so, yeah, in my opinion, it's 50-50. It's as much the players need to be a little bit more responsible for their own bodies, as well as the coaching and the sort of backroom staff needs to improve as well.
Yeah, I think it's a more cultural thing. You guys should read John Wright's book. In that, he had a section where in the training session, folks, the legends like Sachin and Dravid, as soon as they come to the ground, they'll just sit and wait for biscuits and tea and wait for their snacks before they run around, and then they will start it. So it was a cultural change that John Wright had to institute in. So,
well, yeah, I think with older players, that are close to retirement, it's okay, I guess, to sort of forgive them for letting their bodies go a little bit. But that's not been the problem with us. It's not just the senior players. A lot of players who are sort of mid-20s or late 20s, they get fat. Like Angela Matthews, for example, he's actually been good on this. he's started losing weight now that he's 31 years old or 32, and he's a genuine sort of elder statesman of his side now. In that case, he's setting a good example. But when he was in the peak of his career, which should have been, 26 to 30 or 26 to 31, he was not in good shape. And it wasn't like in that time you could point to, Sangakkara or whatever and say, well, Sangakkara wasn't setting a good example. I think, in my opinion, personal responsibility it's a thing. It's an important thing.
Right. I completely get that. So here's another question for you. Who do you think was the most instrumental legend that you lost on the team? Right, if you could have one of them for, like, say, another 10 years, and you think that person could shape the rest of the cricket team to become the best version of themselves, who would it be?
Well, morally would be nice, but realistically, I would go with Ranganatharaf, just because I think the main problem we have in Test cricket today is the lack of a quality spin bowling attack. And so having a world-class spinner like Haraf or Murali come in would go a long way towards solving that problem. And in terms of Test cricket, I actually think we've been quite decent in the last few years. I mean, not brilliant, but decent. I think we're ranked 5th or 6th in the ICC rankings, and that's probably a fair sort of reflection of the team's abilities. Where the real collapse has been in white ball cricket, in ODIs and T20s. In both those formats, the form of the team has just absolutely plummeted in the last 3-4 years. Going from the time where they were making every 50-over World Cup final, or every other T20 World Cup final, in 2020 or 2021, if you sit down and say Sri Lanka is going to make the final of the 50-over World Cup or the T20, nobody's going to take that seriously.
They've had some good results on some, like, separate occasions. Like, if we take it to the test match game, obviously they had that massive victory, well, massive in terms of the occasion in South Africa, which was incredible. So that kind of indicates that the talent is there, but it's just not performing on a regular basis. Yet again, this is from far away, and I could be completely mistaken.
I think resurgence of whole 96 team would be great for Sri Lankan cricket. That came out of nowhere and won a World Cup. And then they kept dominating. It's not that it was a fluke. It was like that team was like, I still have nightmares of Aravinda De Silva, Jayasurya's, hitting everybody, of Indian bowlers. So that's like, I think something that kind of is still needed. I think this was a turning point, in my opinion. 96 was like what 83 of turning point for Indian cricket was, that all of a sudden people started following cricket and where we went. I think something similar with the 96 World Cup for Sri Lanka, and I'm surprised it's going downhill. So hopefully it gets back with what they did in 96.
Drawing from the point of getting the past players back into the mix is one comment that user Sam Crocker made on a post about a year back, and he said that Mahila Sangha and Arvinda came up with a plan under the request of the sports minister last year to restructure the first class cricket in Sri Lanka, but it was ignored. Our country has no future in cricket thanks to mismanagement and politics interfering with the cricket board. Now, is it possible, or is it even a good idea to bring in former players to fix this mismanagement in the first place and put them in a position where they can directly manage the cricket board rather than, let's say, some politicians or completely unqualified people?
So in terms of politics, as I understand, the big issue is that the clubs, so Sri Lanka has clubs, right? Cricket clubs, and they're the first class teams. It's not like counties in England or states in India or Australia. It's clubs, and these clubs have a lot of influence over the SLC, and it's very hard to make the reforms that are necessary. You asked about whether players are qualified to make these reforms, and I think honestly you don't even need to be a player to make these reforms because they're very simple. What Mahela and Sangakkara have been sort of talking about for a long time now is just reducing the number of first-class teams from over 20, I think, 22 or something like that, which is just far too many, and reducing it down to 6 and having these 6 in each represent each province of the country. So just like Australia has states or India has states and England has counties, it becomes geographic and there's an even distribution, and there's only 6 teams. I mean, 22 is a ridiculous number for a country that doesn't have such a big population. And most of them are centered in Colombo as well, which doesn't help. It doesn't give the whole sort of nationwide representation. So I think the reforms they've suggested are really practical and common sense.
Right, for sure. So one post which Arg has brought to our attention is by Oscar T. And he said that one of his points is that, too much money for undeserved players. So basically, I think he's making the point that, the distribution of income is not very structured and is not very fair currently. And that's one of the reasons why, that's one of the reasons which is hampering cricket there. Another point he mentions is that he quite agrees with you. He says that the SLC is quite incompetent and that the officials are very much corrupted, and that's genuinely hampering it. So, yeah, I mean, there does seem to be a lot of issues around this, but my kind of question to you and other Sri Lankan fans is how would you change it around? Obviously, it's very hard to do so as a fan, but if you had the power, for example...
I think in white ball cricket, certainly the talent isn't there. And I'm not saying that the players aren't talented. I'm just saying that the way ODI cricket has changed in the last 5-6 years with these massive totals being like the new norm, I think with that sort of meta, we're going to struggle for a while just to produce the big hitters you need to be like competitive in that scene. Because Sri Lanka is a little bit like India, produces a lot of classical batsmen who score like a decent 85, 90 odd strike rate. They're not going to be the big Chris Gale types or the Andre Russell types who can come out and hit 100 off, 45 balls. Not too many of those guys going around. So in white ball cricket, I think definitely there's going to be struggles for some time, even if everything was perfect behind the scenes. In terms of what we could do better right now, I think one important point we haven't hit on yet is that we keep changing captains and coaches, at a rate of more than one every year. So this decade we've had 12 coaches and 13 captains, which is just crazy. How are you going to get any sort of consistency out of a side when the leadership is constantly changing? So I think that's one very small thing we could do. Just pick a captain, pick a coach, back them for 3 or 4 years. And that's something that would probably improve our consistency in Test cricket. And as we were discussing earlier, fitness as well. So get a good fitness coach in, get a dietitian, get these players to take their health seriously.
I think they're in a vicious circle where they're not making enough money. And then, of course, you guys said that it's politics, which is also siphoning some money out. So that's also something. But absolutely, somebody who's very determined. I would love to see Sangakkara coming in. He sounds like the way he talks. I think he's head of MCC as well, so I'm sure he has now experience and he can bring in and
right. And you mentioned Foothill having consistency with the captains. So who would, if you had your choice, who would you choose as the captains to take Sri Lanka forward?
I'm very happy with the current captain, Dimuth Karunaratne. I think he's been really good in terms of turning around the morale of the team. So if you guys remember, before the South Africa series last year, Chandimal was the captain, and we got smashed in Australia. We absolutely smashed, and that was Australia without Steve Smith, without David Warner. It wasn't the same Australia that England had to go up against. And in the aftermath of that series, Chandimal was dropped and sacked, and Karunaratne got the job. And from that really low points of that Australia series, he turned things around and gave the team the belief that they could win in South Africa, which they were able to go on and do. He was also the captain during the World Cup, and I think that game against England that we won, his tactics was excellent as well. So I think in terms of what a captain is supposed to do, a captain is supposed to be a good leader in terms of keeping the morale up. He's good at that. The captain is also supposed to have sort of a good tactical knowledge, and I think he's shown that as well. So I'm really happy with him to continue. But the problem is, we're going to lose a couple of tests down the track, and he's going to get sacked. There's just so much short-termism, sort of in whoever it is that makes that decision, the board, I guess.
Referring to that point of hiring and firing, there was one interesting post on Reddit of some time back. It said that between 2011 World Cup and 2019 World Cup, that is the end of 2011 World Cup and beginning of and the end of 2019 World Cup, Sri Lanka has had 10 different full-time coaches. That is a lot in 8 years. And there was one interesting comment on that post by one user, Docus Melorcus. He said, these toxic revolving door workplaces that keep hiring and firing and management claims it's never their fault. That's exactly what it is, Sri Lankan cricket. So yeah, that figure of 10 really shows that there's no stability in any plans that Sri Lankan cricket have, and that is probably hurting them a lot.
Yeah, it's like football, isn't it? It's easier to sack the coach than it is to sack the board.
I think we've got a great insight into Sri Lankan cricket this episode and talked about some of the clear points which have led to its downfall. But like we have mentioned, it isn't all doom and gloom. There's definitely some talent there. And as has been seen by the recent victory in South Africa and the amazing innings of Pereira, there's some room for optimism for sure. But corruption is something which goes really, really deep, and it's something which is very hard to eradicate. And it's going to take a while, but hopefully Sri Lankan cricket can get its stuff together and just focus on the stability, and perhaps we could get some past players and getting in there and helping when they can. But thank you very much to Foothill. Definitely be hearing from him again as a more permanent role on our team. But any other closing points you guys would like to mention?
No, thanks very much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
For sure.
Always going to be fun. This podcast is a very fun podcast. So, guys who are listening, please reach out to us. We need some more perspective.
Yeah, I feel like we probably do need a Pakistani perspective down the line. And
a South African perspective as well.
Sure. I think it would be fun to do an India-Pakistan type podcast sometime down the road. But please do stay tuned. And as always, please join our Discord. Any feedback is welcome. And as always, stay safe and have a good one. I'll leave it to the guys to say goodbye.
Goodbye, guys. Stay safe.
Stay safe. Wash your hands, guys.
Take care, guys. Bye.